One of the most frequently forgotten French-speaking regions of the world is found in the far south of the former colony of New France. 3 centuries after the arrival of explorers in the mouth of the Mississippi, and 2 centuries after the lowering of the French flag in New Orleans after its sale to the United States, a unique and French-speaking culture persists today. Despite a pronounced decline that began in the mid-19th century, the Cajun language perseveres, thanks to renewed interest during the 1960s, combined with the founding of the Council for the Development of French in Louisiana, or CODOFIL. But there was never a single Cajun identity, nor a single language. During the colonial era, Louisiana French languages included the French of refugees from Acadia and the Caribbean islands, the dialects of the settlers, and the Creole of blacks and free people of color, which were mixed to create a distinct Louisiana French. 60 years ago, Louisiana was home to 1 million French speakers, but today, the language is at risk of disappearing. To combat the challenges and risk of the disappearance of this unique heritage and culture, the approach to defending the French language is beginning to change. The new generation is ready to take its place in the fight for its culture. These new ambassadors sing their Cajun culture with music in a new modern style, and they share their language with new audiences on the internet and social media. In addition, this generation is responsible for recognizing the diverse voices to which Louisiana French also belongs, but which had not received the same support as their white neighbors. Now, there is a greater interest in discovering and preserving the French of indigenous peoples, and the Creole language of a mixed-race people unique to Louisiana. For French speakers in Louisiana, the efforts of the new generation to create media and include formerly excluded French-speaking voices still offer hope in the battle to preserve the language and Franco-Louisianan heritage. To begin, let's examine the history of French in Louisiana. In 1682, René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, traveled down the Mississippi and claimed all the territory that drained into the river for France. He named this territory Louisiana, in honor of King Louis XIV. Recruitment for settlers in the colony was difficult. In 1718, New Orleans was founded by Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne, Sieur de Bienville. This town had only 4 houses and 68 settlers. To populate the colony, the French had to recruit not only French people, but also Germans, Swiss, and black settlers. The origins of the French settlers were also diverse, coming from all the provinces of France. All these peoples inhabited the same land as several indigenous tribes. This mixture would provide the necessary conditions for the creation of a diverse society that would form identities and languages unique to Louisiana. Good relations between the French and the native tribes were essential for the continuation of the French colony. The French needed the natives to feed their colonial population, who did not necessarily consist of farmers, and for their protection against hostile tribes and English settlers. Typically, the French established their forts and colonies close to the natives. Sometimes settlers created sites close to native villages that already existed, but often the natives were convinced by the French to move their communities near new French posts. These two groups lived together with regular contact and a certain equality, which introduced the French language to the indigenous population, and also influenced the development of French spoken by the settlers. France ceded Louisiana to Spain in 1763 after a secret treaty. Paradoxically, it was under Spanish domination that the French language was firmly established there. In 1755, after the occupation of Acadia in Canada during the 7 Years' War, French settlers from this region were expelled. After 10 years, the Spanish authorities, happy to welcome Catholic settlers into their sparsely populated territory, opened the territory to these refugees. During the Spanish occupation, the population of Louisiana increased from 20,000 to 50,000 inhabitants, thanks largely to Acadian arrivals. The Acadians brought their dialect, especially influenced by the dialects of Old World Normandy, which mixed with French Creole settlers and ensured that French would survive in the territory. In 1803, Louisiana was sold to the United States, adding a new group who found themselves as the new masters of the territory, but also new immigrants. As during the Spanish era, the beginning of the American period was marked by the influx of French-speaking immigrants. The largest group were refugees from Saint-Domingue after the Haitian Revolution, which included the island's white planters, slaves, and free people of color. Between 1,000 and 2,000 refugees arrived between 1791 and 1804. And an article published in 1810 in the Louisiana Monitor noted the arrival of more than 9,000 individuals. The majority of these arrivals remained in New Orleans. This event introduced a Franco-Caribbean population, which developed artistic activities in New Orleans, marked by the opening of theaters in the city, dominated by actors from Saint-Domingue, the improvement of the educational system, and the creation of French-speaking newspapers. The arrivals also brought a French dialect, which developed in unison with the French of 19th century France, because of the continuous links between the metropole and the wealthy planters of Louisiana, who sent their children to France for their education. After the Civil War, the prestige of French in Louisiana began to diminish. After the South's defeat, a new state constitution proclaimed English the sole official language. The discovery of oil in the Cajun country in 1901 led to a massive arrival of English-speaking workers. The 1921 Constitution banned French in schools and in official life. This ban is responsible for the extreme decline of Louisiana French during the 20th century. Children were punished for speaking French at school, and these children began to associate French with social stigma. The application of these rules of language use was not uniform. There were schools where English was introduced gradually, but there were others where corporal punishment was imposed. Older generations remember being forced to write, "I will not speak French" on the school grounds, kneeling on rice grains, or being hit by teachers. There are also stories of children who soiled their underwear because they were unable to ask to go to the toilet in English. In addition, the French of Cajun in schools was denigrated by teachers who said that their French was incorrect and simple, and that real French people would not understand it. After this great change in the status of the French language in schools, French would be just one foreign language among others taught in public schools in Louisiana until today. After World War II, interest in the preservation of French in Louisiana increased, and in 1968 CODOFIL was created through the efforts of James Domingo to expand professional and economic opportunities for French-speaking Louisianans. CODOFIL continues its mission to promote Cajun language and culture, but its creation has also brought new challenges. To start, CODOFIL had to create a French education program for all of Louisiana. To facilitate this task, CODOFIL supported the teaching of Standard French as a second language in primary schools. CODOFIL hired teachers from France, Belgium, and Quebec. These efforts attracted the attention and investment of these French-speaking countries for this Louisiana revitalization experiment. In 2022, there were 34 French immersion schools with 5,000 students, and 20,000 who had received an education in French since the program began in 1984. The University of Louisiana at Lafayette offers courses in Cajun French and Creole, and a minor in Cajun and Creole studies. It is undeniable that efforts to promote French in Louisiana have seen success. Despite these efforts, CODOFIL has not escaped criticism for its practice of promoting Standard French instead of authentic Cajun French, which recalls the same resistance against the imposition of English in the past. Activists fear the moment when a French-speaking Cajun will say that he does not speak real French. This state of education can create a situation where, despite parents' efforts to awaken a sense of connection to heritage in Cajun children, the new generation and older generation end up speaking different French languages. Today, CODOFIL wants to increase the number of Louisiana French teachers. Despite this goal, the teaching of French in Louisiana remains a foreign enterprise. During the 2008 to 2009 school year, the Louisiana Department of Education reported that 125 of 160 immersion teachers were foreigners who spoke and taught standard French. Today, the teaching of standard and international French still remains the only realistic option. If this pattern continues, it is possible that the status of Cajun French in the eyes of society will decline, and that students in immersion schools will associate the language of their ancestors with the isolated bayou, and standard French with employment opportunities and a more relevant global connection. Louisiana is a fascinating example of a French-speaking community fighting for its survival. The expansive scale of CODOFIL's programs for teaching and promoting their language and cultural heritage is unique in the United States. CODOFIL has won victories in the educational field thanks to the support of foreign governments and the enthusiasm of teachers who travel to Louisiana to strengthen cultural and French knowledge among elementary school students. But these same efforts to save and preserve the language and Cajun culture may also exacerbate their decline. The new generation continues to be proud of its heritage, but this heritage is no longer necessarily linked to the Cajun French language. Additionally, the use of standard French and the economic opportunities it affords threatens to create a new generation of proud Cajuns who do not know the language of their grandparents. To ensure the survival of this language and culture, the sole focus on Cajun French is also changing, marked by a renewed interest in Louisiana Creole. Creole is distinct from Cajun French. It developed in the 18th century among African slaves in Louisiana. Today, there are still speakers of the language, but it remains poorly understood. It is difficult to know the exact number of Creole speakers. There are many Creole speakers who are no longer able to speak the language at home, and therefore no longer identify with the language. In the past, the Creole language was stigmatized, and this can motivate speakers to say that they don't speak Creole. Additionally, language definitions are not precise. The term Cajun is not completely standard, and the term Creole is often used to refer to the same language. Often, speakers of the two distinct languages simply say that they speak French. Ethnic identity is also linked to definitions. A white person who speaks Creole might say that he speaks Cajun French, and a black person who speaks Cajun French might say the opposite. Despite the confusion in identifying speakers of Cajun French and Louisiana Creole, a unique community still exists that speaks a language completely distinct from the French of their neighbors in Louisiana. The beginning of the history of Creole in Louisiana is linked to slavery. The slave trade in Louisiana lasted from 1719 to 1731. During this time, over 5,000 Africans arrived in Louisiana. They worked on plantations on the Mississippi, but also as laborers in New Orleans and as soldiers. During the Spanish era, the slave population increased from nearly 5,000 in 1763 to over 24,000 in 1800. As previously mentioned, after the start of the Haitian Revolution in 1791, Louisiana began to welcome refugees from Saint-Domingue. It is likely that the majority of slaves and free people of color who arrived in Louisiana spoke Haitian Creole. Some say that it was this migration of blacks from Saint-Domingue that introduced Creole to Louisiana, but there is evidence to suggest that Creole existed even before. The first reference to a Creole language was in 1792 during a legal trial for slaves accused of trying to organize a revolt. During the trial, it was not clear that the slaves spoke French. It was said that they could not speak French, but that they spoke a mixture of their native language and poorly pronounced and structured French. The decline of Creole in Louisiana is linked to segregation. In the past, Creole identity was defined by birth in Louisiana, knowledge of the French or Creole language, and the Catholic faith. As a result, Creole people included white Cajuns, blacks, and mixed-race people. The ban on French in schools contributed to the decline of French and Creole, but racial separation during the Jim Crow era influenced the continued stigmatization of the Creole language even after the birth of CODOFIL. From the beginning of the movement for the revitalization of Cajun French, there were efforts to organize a preservation of Creole identity. The Creole Renaissance began in the 1960s after the Civil Rights Movement. It was during this time that Creoles began again to identify themselves as a unique people distinct from other Americans with African heritage. The Creole people also began to include Native Americans as a part of their identity, which marked the end of the binary system imposed by segregation in Louisiana. This movement gave birth to the first dictionary of Louisiana Creole, which gave legitimacy to a language already spoken in Louisiana for 3 centuries. The new generation of Creole speakers is beginning to redefine the movement with the use of social media. This generation consists of students of the language who do not speak it as their mother tongue, but who learn the language as adults or through immersion revitalization programs. This generation is concerned with the power of names to identify them, and this new movement prefers to use the term kouri-vini, from the French courier-venir, instead of Creole, which may lead it to be compared with other Creole languages that do not share its unique history in Louisiana. In 2015, the movement began calling for a change to the name Louisiana Creole French, to separate itself from French as a distinct language, and to establish itself as a unique identity among revitalization movements in Louisiana. The power of spelling is an important consideration too. During the Creole Renaissance, to create the Creole dictionary, activists often used French spelling. Now, the creation of a distinct orthography is a priority of the new movement, which wants to give further legitimacy to their language by creating an autonomous linguistic system. Despite these efforts, the future for Creole in Louisiana is not certain. Most speakers are aging, and the new generation does not learn the language at home. It will be interesting to see if recent efforts to save Creole will be successful. Another element in the diversity of French speakers in Louisiana is that of the natives who still speak French and who have preserved their language. In Terrebonne Parish and Lafourche Parish, there exists a community of indigenous francophones for whom French is an essential aspect of their unique identity. Before the arrival of Europeans in Louisiana, these 2 parishes were inhabited by the Biloxi, Wash, Chawasha, and Chitimacha tribes. As already discussed, these tribes had moved according to their relations with the French settlers, either friendly or hostile. The parishes of Terrebonne and Lafourche were isolated for a long time, and the natives who remained there had formed a unified identity together after their integration with the Houma tribe. At the same time as this indigenous migration, the Acadians arrived in Louisiana, and French became the dominant language even among the indigenous people, linked to the evangelization of Catholicism among these communities. In fact, the French language became a kind of indigenous language, as Louisiana natives retained French for a generation longer than their white neighbors, due to the lack of education for indigenous people during the Jim Crow era. Today, the youngest French speakers among indigenous communities are on average 20 years younger than French-speaking Cajuns, and they include monolingual French speakers, who may no longer exist outside of these communities. In fact, in these parishes, the ability to speak French is directly associated with indigenous identity by residents. In the 1970s, the Houma tribe began their effort to be recognized by the federal government. In 1979, the unified Houma nation was established, and it applied for federal recognition in 1985. In 1994, their petition was declined, because the Bureau of Indian Affairs insisted that it could not find a single historical group of ancestors of the Houma tribe. The difficulty of being granted official status by the federal government is not the only problem that indigenous communities face. The loss of French is perhaps the most relevant in the struggle for legitimacy for South Louisiana's natives. Many children of French-speaking natives do not want to learn French because it identifies them as Indians. In schools, if children learn French, it is standard French, a reality which does not sit well with many community members. Today, revitalization includes all languages spoken by Louisianans, whites, Creoles, and natives. The largest festival to promote Franco-Louisiana language and culture changed its name in 2008 from Festival Acadien to Festival Acadien et Creole, to better represent the cultures that were always present during the celebration. The new generation in Louisiana is beginning to be part of this revitalization effort with the promotion of the French language outside of the classroom. Louisiana's unique food, music, and arts were always important in the lives of French-speaking Louisianans, and these traditions continue today with new young ambassadors, for whom Louisiana French is an indispensable way to express their identity. One of the most important and well-known artists is Jourdan Thibaudeau. Thibaudeau has explained why music is so important to protect and maintain Louisiana Francophone culture. For him and the new generation, every aspect of Franco-Louisianan culture plays a role in its perseverance. The best weapon in the fight for Franco-Louisianan culture is social media, which has the ability to attract and inspire interest in linguistic and cultural preservation. Thibaudeau's YouTube channel and Instagram account have about 140,000 followers, compared to only 68,000 French speakers in Louisiana today. Thanks to the internet and the interconnected world, Louisiana French now belongs to everyone, and it is everyone's duty to preserve it for generations to come. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to support more videos like this. See you in the next video.